This is I Love Black People Radio on HUR Voices, Sirius XM, Channel 141. I Love Black People is more than a radio show. I Love Black People is a call from our ancestors to protect us from racial profiling all across the world. Go to ILoveBlackPeople.com and become a member today. Membership empowers you to live fearlessly and protect Black people globally from racism and xenophobia. Join us today and become a member of our global network with an online global green book with Black-owned and Black-friendly businesses to protect you and your community. Membership is free, and with you, we will become 10 million strong worldwide. I am because we are.
And welcome to another edition of I Love Black People. And today we're so blessed to have a wonderful, dedicated academician, professor, educator, writer, scholar, global internationalist, just an amazing, wonderful, good sister, Dr. Tyrene Wright. Welcome to I Love Black People, and thank you so much for the classes that you do for I Love Black People and all the people you teach all over the world every day. Thank you so much. Please let the audience know who you are, share what you and so many of them probably already know you, but for those who don't, please share a little bit so we can get right into this amazing book that talks about someone that we all love, and if we don't love, we don't know the truth. So you're about to break that down too. So thank you, Sister Tyrene.
Thank you for having me. So yes, you're right. I'm the author of the book, Booker T. Washington in Africa, The Making of a Pan-Africanist. I teach for the City University of New York. I teach for the City University of New York. And yes, I also teach for I Love Black People, an ideological training course on Pan-African history and organizing, amongst other things. Okay, so and so thank you for having me, Sinclair. Where the book is actually in its 7th year, and it's about to be republished, a revised and expanded version of the original book. And it includes a lot more information. And so this is part of the reason why there's been sort of a rebirth and a reigniting of the conversation around Booker T. Washington and his role in Africa.
I think that's important, and so many of our people, as we, different generations come and go, talking about our ancestry and as Africans in America, and talking about Pan-Africanism as a ideology. Give us a little background on that, maybe, and then take us to Booker T. Washington as he enters the conversation and the book, and expound on that, please.
Okay. Well, so just to begin with the concept of Pan-Africanism, early on in my research around Washington and Africa, I'm not saying Washington was a Pan-Africanist. I'm merely presenting the information and the historical facts that related to his role during that period. And so many people probably remember or recall that Pan-Africanism, the term, is coined by a man named Henry Sylvester Williams from Trinidad. And he is part of an organization called the African Association. And at the time that he coins that phrase, he is stationed in London. And the African Association is planning to put together a conference called the First Pan-African Conference in a couple of years, which would be 1900. So the concept of Pan-Africanism has always existed, but the phrase, the coining of the term, comes about at a very specific time. And one of the people that is involved in spreading the word about this first Pan-African conference is none other than Booker T. Washington. Okay, he is one of the key promoters of the conference in the Americas. And why? Why would that be? Well, the primary means of communication at the time would be the printed press. And he has significant control of the Black press. And so he makes sure that there is an announcement about this upcoming conference in every Black paper in the US that he has connections with. And he continues to promote the conference until it actually takes place. He's part of the plenary sessions as well as Du Bois, and he and Du Bois are both participating in the plenary sessions leading up to the Pan-African Conference, the first Pan-African Conference. Now, he doesn't attend Booker T. Washington, but Du Bois does. And there's a sort of a myth that's out there regarding that, meaning that Booker T. Washington didn't attend because Du Bois did. No, that is not correct. So the historical record and all of this can be seen in personal papers. It's in my book, but it's also in the personal papers of Booker T. Washington, and very likely Du Bois as well, that they were both on good terms. These are the years leading up to 1900. The break in their relationship does not come until 1903, and even then, it's not quite what people think. So they are not at odds. He does not attend. He is largely, he being Booker T. Washington, committed to Tuskegee and would seldom leave Tuskegee for anything other than to raise money for Tuskegee, right? So he frequented Europe, and he is in Europe when Henry Sylvester Williams asked him to promote the conference. However, once he returns to the United States, he does not go back to Europe for the conference, and Du Bois does, right? So my early research around that is just establishing Washington's role in various historical events and situations. So, for example, one, the first Pan-African Conference, two, propagandizing against the atrocities in the Congo Free State, again, as perpetrated by King Leopold. And also, he is in communication with people like Bishop Henry McNeill Turner, and they're talking about colonialism in Africa, and he is considering, to a large extent, and you can see this in the book as well, what are the prospects for African people in America on the continent of Africa? Okay, he thoroughly examined that possibility and the prospects of a return to Africa, and he explains that because of his relationship with Bishop Turner, he must give it some serious consideration. But also, he's involved in Africa, researching Africa, okay? And he is interested in exporting the Tuskegee model. So from as early as 1893, there's a steady stream of students from the African continent attending Tuskegee. So this book explores all of that, and where the rubber meets the road is when, after a major case that is catastrophic, the Togo expedition, Washington, as a result of his communication with African nationalists in South Africa, budding members of the ANC, other activists and nationalists on the continent, John Chilembwe of Malawi, and others who he inspires, but they also inform him of their condition and reality on the African continent. So he undergoes a bit of a transformation in understanding exactly what the day-to-day life of African people is like under colonialism. And so the case is really ultimately the cases in the book ultimately are the Liberian crisis and the African exclusion measure. That's the meat of the book that allows one to say that Washington was a Pan-Africanist, not in declaration, but in deed, in act, right? Through action. And so that's the basic premise of the book. And Pan-Africanism is defined early on in the book. I give a whole chapter to, define that theoretical framework of Pan-Africanism. What does that mean? And
what did his contemporaries, even today, I'm a Pan-Africanist. When I say that to my family at the cookout or at the happy hour, everybody doesn't necessarily get what that is. I can imagine at the turn of that century, his actions and behavior, or maybe I can't imagine. I think it'd be helpful to put him in context. He's in Macon County, Alabama. He comes from Virginia. He's talking about Africa, far away. Most of the folks that he's talking to have never been to Africa themselves. And then as he gets older, of course, his university, he's meeting folks who coming straight from the continent directly, as opposed to indirectly through the transatlantic. How, do they receive, even if they saw it in newspapers, the black papers, what was the climate for, newly emancipated African people as a part of the diaspora that were not born and raised in Africa? What was that context like?
So I spend a whole chapter discussing precisely that, like the climate, the social, political climate at that moment in time. And I think what's happening in the world at large, or throughout the African world, everywhere African people are, is sort of a buzzing energy around organizing, a desire to organize as they come to understand that everywhere we are experiencing the same conditions. So, example, I opened the chapter up on Pan-Africanism with a quote from Booker T. Washington. Now, I do actually think that it is, very altruistic of him, but at the same time, it gives you some understanding of how he's seeing the world and how he's seeing African people in the world at that moment in time. And so this is a quote directly from another book of his called The Story of the Negro, The Rise of the Race from Slavery. And he wrote, "There is, however, a tie which few white men can understand, which binds the American Negro to the African Negro, which unites the black man of Brazil and the black man of Liberia, which is constantly drawing into closer relations all the scattered African peoples, whether they are in the old world or in the new." All right, so he's scattered African peoples. This is him. So, this is one of the reasons why it's sort of funny that people don't know about Washington's Pan-African or African worldview, because there was a whole book written by him and dedicated to this, his inquiries regarding Africa, and he refers to it as home, and African people, ethnically and culturally in every way, right? And he examines every aspect of African life in that book. But he goes on to say, "I have rarely met in America anyone of my race who did not, in one way or another, show a deep interest in everything connected with Africa. The millions of Negroes in America are almost as much interested, for example, in the future of Liberia and Abyssinia as they are in their own country. There is always a peculiar and scarcely definable bond that binds one black man to another black man, whether in Africa, Jamaica, Haiti, or the United States." So he makes that connection, and that's
wow. You can't get blacker than that. That was black. That's black on the black hand side,
right.
the back hand side, front side.
That's Washington, and that's in The Story of the Negro. Those are his words. Story of the Negro was published in 1909. So, and it was really written around 1901, but it's not published until 1909. Now, the book goes unnoticed largely because people wanted him to talk about social and political rights in America and the Reconstruction Amendments, and that wasn't what he was talking about. He was talking about the Negro at home, meaning Africa, and he's breaking
Wow.
down.
And
He's
to spin a
attempting.
book, yeah, to spin a book. And the fact that he was leading a major institution, a premier institution of higher learning for Black folks. I mean, anytime he takes to write a book or write anything, it's got to be a calculated, deliberate, intentional thing.
Right.
And to actually make that time and make those resources available to specifically, particularly look at us as a diaspora is pretty powerful. And you said that was Booker T, not WEB. You said Booker T.
No, that's Booker
All
T.
right.
Washington.
Yeah, I'm just
Those
trying to
are
make sure. Sometimes these initials get a little tricky. I know there's a B and a T, and then there's a WEB. I just want to be clear that was Booker T. You said with the book, which is awesome.
right.
With that being said, where is the disconnect with that connecting of his work? I know Marcus Garvey sought him out, modeled so much. Where is the push to disconnect the Afrocentric, the African-facing perspective? I think, not just with Booker T per se, but it's almost like we don't hear about us as a people collectively looking towards Africa, but for a few folks before the ending of all the slavery who were taken over to Liberia, like literally, it seems as if the conversation about Reconstruction, if anything, they'll talk about a migration to the north as people are analyzing the political landscape in North America. I think we sometimes hear about people going to Mexico and the Caribbean, but where is that? Why is it that when we think of Black power, we think Marcus Garvey and then the late 60s? And that's kind of like every other era is kind of like an empty space in it. Like Liberia, even when we hear people talk about that, they talk about the colonialism and blackface and some of the problematic things, maybe the origins in the African movement back then. But for us sake, it seems like it's Marcus Garvey and then the late 60s, Black Power, Stokely, and Kwame Ture. And then I think there's a resurgence. We got the Black medallions and things in the late 80s, early 90s. But it seemed like there's a big gap early on at that turn of the century that it's clear that somebody as powerful as Booker T. Washington was definitely looking in that direction. From the Honorable Elijah Muhammad coming out of Marcus Garvey, Garveyites. What's the brother with the Moors? There's so much that's come out. How do we lose those connections?
Well, I think so. I can't speak for all of them, but I do know specifically with regard to Booker T. Washington, there's something very specific that happens with Booker T. Washington. Okay. And it's a very deliberate thing that happens in the academy specifically. So, Washington, after his death, his personal papers were not open. Okay. So, you would never know what he was up to personally. His personal papers are not edited until 1970 and by the Library of Congress. So anybody who would have been alive, his contemporaries at that time, would have all been dead by the time Washington's personal papers are opened up and preserved and made public and published. That being said, the person who preserves or adds editorial notes. And see, this is something that, there's a lot of people that all of a sudden are somewhat interested in this whole thing, Washington in Africa, only because it's kind of like it's the unbeaten path. And so it's provocative, right? If you've bought into the dominant notions. But that's just it. The person who edited or added editorial notes and transcribed Washington's personal papers is none other than a man named Lewis Harlan, a white man, historian, who was a student of Du Bois. So, in other words, Du Bois, who was a scholar, had a student named Van Woodward, and Lewis Harlan is a student of Van Woodward. However, what he decides to do is make his career on editing Washington's personal papers, writing countless articles about Booker T. Washington, writing 2 biographies. The most established biographies on Booker T. Washington are written by Lewis Harlan. And he hated Booker T. Washington.
I think you can feel I read the first one was easier to read. The second one, the one was something about the whirlwind, and you could tell that there was no fondness. Like, I've read enough biographies where you can see that certain things that people admired, you can tell by the way they phrase things or focus on areas of who they were. Like, suppose somebody was into somebody being from the South, they would play up some of the connection to the Southernness. Or if somebody was a doctor, they would talk about how the medical profession impacted even in this area. It had nothing to do with it because they were intrigued about that. I didn't see anything about, and I thought since the book was coming out around the 70s, like you said, the early 70s, that maybe there was a feeling that they wanted Booker T. Washington to act in a way that probably was out of context for the turn of the century, and it was trying to project the sensibilities of the late 60s, early 70s on the turn of the century, 20th century behavior, which just doesn't even make sense. But for you to say he didn't even like him is not hard to believe,
right.
Reading some of that.
Now, you probably know someone who not only could corroborate this, but it's in print, and I'll get to that. So, Dr. Williams, I don't know if you remember Dr. Danny Hale Williams.
Oh, I love Danny Williams.
Right, I knew Dr. Williams as well because I was
sweet man, like literally sweet, super
so
sweet.
He gave
guy.
me access to a lot of things, but also he was there, and so was Mrs. Wilson when Lewis Harlan came to work on Washington's personal papers for the Library of Congress, and he got a huge grant to do so. Let me just say this. There's 1,000 boxes of Booker T. Washington's personal papers that today are still unedited. So that's a whole nother story. So we don't even know what's in there. However, of the papers that were preserved, it produced 15 volumes, each volume around 300 to 500 pages, just straight correspondence. Few people can read the papers and even recreate and identify some of who the correspondence is with, aside from it being with Booker T. Washington, meaning who was he talking to? Why was he talking to him? What are they talking about? All of that. You have to do that kind of work when you're doing this kind of primary research. That being said, I found that Lewis Harlan made a lot of mistakes in his editorial notes. Mistakes, meaning around dates, situations, people, circumstances, so on and so forth. So, example, one of the cases that I cover in my book, when he talks about the outcome, what the actual vote was on a particular measure, he's wrong. And so I'm able to, go in and identify these between looking at the personal papers and corroborating the information with the congressional record around one particular case, the African exclusion measure. So, Harlan was not committed to the endeavor. He had a personal bias against Booker T. Washington. However, he had an uninterrupted monopoly on the interpretation of Washington. And this is part of the reason why we have the views and have been given sort of the image of Washington that we have been given, because it has been handed to us. We have been told what to think about.
What is he still alive?
No, he died around 2010.
Okay.
Right? And just as I
may he rest. Yeah, may he rest. May he rest.
So
however he rests, may he rest. I don't want to say anything weird. So may he rest. That being said, we appreciate the time you spent with us today. And as I always end the show, I am because we are, and I definitely am because of Dr. Wright, and definitely because of the most dynamic, honorable Booker Talifera Washington. So that being said, thank you and appreciate all that you do.
Thank you for having me.
This is I Love Black People Radio on HUR Voices, Sirius XM Channel 141. I Love Black People is more than a radio show. I Love Black People is a call from our ancestors to protect us from racial profiling all across the world. Go to ILoveBlackPeople.com and become a member today. Membership empowers you to live fearlessly and protect Black people globally from racism and xenophobia. Join us today and become a member of our global network with an online global green book with Black-owned and Black-friendly businesses to protect you and your community. Membership is free, and with you, we will become 10 million strong worldwide. I am because we are.